start on that?
Okay, perfect. So I don't think I'm going to say anything that probably hasn't been said before because everyone's asked good questions, and I think most of what I was going to talk about, we've talked about in some form or another, but hopefully you'll get a level of continuity as I walk up. So, excuse me, this is essentially the summary, and I wanted to walk you guys through at least how we're thinking of the stack in terms of the software-defined data center and connecting the pieces. And it goes back to that conversation we had earlier, right, where essentially when you view it, you can view the app being up top, whether it's up top or not, doesn't matter. You know, you have the infrastructure down here, and the goal is to get that app to the infrastructure as quickly as possible and get that infrastructure ready for the app as quickly as possible. And so how do you do that, and how do you make sure the two sides are talking to each other? So it starts with composable. I'm going to fly through the composable stuff pretty quickly because I think you know that. But right, when you look at your infrastructure boxes, they're going to be full of disk, of CPU, and of networking. Right, so let's just say each one has 4 disks, 2 CPUs, two networking things, you know, two pieces of network, whatever you want to call it. Right, and the concept of fluid pools of resources is I don't want to be stuck in this physical form factor. So I want to take these disks, all of these disks, and elevate them outside of the physical boundaries of the box. Same with, you know, CPU and memory to start with. As some of you have heard us talk about, down the line we see CPU and memory being separated, but in the beginning you would break them up either through virtualization or containers. And you have your networking resources, right? And so this is what we call our fluid pool of resources. We take our software-defined intelligence and we go and we pull the disks we need, the CPUs and memory we need, and the networking we need to create a footprint for the application. Right, so the software-defined intelligence goes into this fluid pool of resources, gives an application a footprint. Each application may have some of the other footprints. What we're talking about earlier, the nice thing about Synergy is you can imagine you can have an application that only needs 1 disk on the same infrastructure as the application that needs 80 disk. Right, what you don't need is you don't need to proliferate your various different form factors here in the infrastructure to accommodate the different application needs. Because you have this fluid pool of resources, you can essentially flex what capacity that application needs. And then the third part here of composable infrastructure is the unified APIs. And again, a single API into that. Now the nice thing that this does is it goes and it creates a bare metal library, right, for the infrastructure. So you're gonna have various numbers of profiles. That could be profile 1, profile 2, profile 3, profile 4, right, associated with applications. I can now serve these profiles up into higher level constructs. So again, Gary showed you the example with Chef. The nice thing about having Chef point to a profile is, number one, you don't have to program Chef yourself, or whoever's programming Chef doesn't go and they don't have to go and program all of these through all of these infrastructure APIs. That makes automation of Chef easier, number one. Number two, because an infrastructure person is actually going to control this profile, it's going to always be up to date, right? What I hear happen sometimes is the person programming Chef or Puppet or Salt or whoever is actually a developer. And so they're talking to the infrastructure person, trying to get the right BIOS settings, the right settings for that server. They may be slightly out of sync. Someone may make a mistake. That automation doesn't work. So by going and taking one of these drivers from this bare metal library, essentially bringing this bare metal library up here, you don't get the errors that you see happen in automation. So we'll hook into automation or configuration tools like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Salt, but we'll also, as we talked about earlier, hook into Git. So as you move into that DevOps world, you have the ability to go and associate a profile with an application. So as that application goes through its lifecycle process, you can go down and pull the pieces of infrastructure it needs, and you can also do versioning control. So if something changes, someone knows that something changes, and when you go to kick off that next automation, things don't break. So we want to hook into these higher level constructs, and as Gary showed, not just automation tools, but other data center tools in terms of power, et cetera, right? So that's kind of the fundamentals of composable infrastructure. And what that does is it sits down in what we'll call our infrastructure layer, right? So you have a composable infrastructure down here that's malleable. Now you want to hook that into your hybrid cloud. So we look at this hybrid cloud layer as sitting up top and essentially having two personalities like we talked about before, right? There's your traditional world and there's your cloud native world. In your traditional world, we have a lot of great tools in HPE like CSA, OO, etc. That have obviously spun out, as you heard from Rick, as you heard Rick say, we'll have close partnerships with them. On the cloud native side, we have things like Staccato and Staccato 4.0, for those of you who haven't seen it, some really nice features in terms of its ability to do the write once, run anywhere, right? That's really the goal of that platform. And you'll see in 4.0, it supports a lot more underlying infrastructures than it has in the past. So it's really becoming this write once, run anywhere platform. So we'll have Staccato up here, and then we have Helion OpenStack as the IaaS layer underneath it. And I'm going to come back up here, but essentially that becomes how we view our hybrid world, two different worlds. They can be pulled together by some type of service catalog and some type of orchestration tool. Now what happens in between here is as I go and need to create my infrastructure, I have a whole bunch of tools. I may have vCenter, System Center, I may be using Docker, I may have a bunch of analytics tools and a bunch of management tools. So I have all these tools I've brought over my infrastructure that are causing increased complexity. When you look at what we're trying to do with hyperconverged, and as we move down the line and bring together a single stack, what we want to do is bring a nice simple layer over here, much like we've done with the HC380. So the HC380 was an important foreshadow of how we're going to really start to view the infrastructure and allow people to go into one place and very easily deploy the execution environment they want to deploy. Right. So now fundamentally you have three layers. You have your composable infrastructure, you have a layer of unified management above that to go and allow you to work into any composable layer, and then you have a layer of what we'll call hybrid cloud to work above it. So, yep.
I missed, what's above Staccato? What's the C?
This could be a service catalog, right? So you can there'll be
above what's the C?
service catalog.
And then right there above stack is
Above
C.
stack.
Those C, your
Cloud
initials
native.
there.
Oh, above
Cloud
here.
native. I didn't.
Yeah, sorry,
I
cloud
didn't-
native.
I couldn't
Yep.
read your hand.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep. This is
Sorry to
traditional
derail
cloud.
you. I
Cloud
missed
native. Yeah,
it.
I know. I'm just doing chicken scratch. Sorry.
Gotcha.
So this is kind of how we're viewing things as we go forward. Now, as you'll start to see these two layers merge, because in reality what happens is this becomes IaaS. So when you look at the runtime environment, it's essentially you'll have your PaaS layer here, you'll have your IaaS layer, which really stretches between these two worlds, and then you'll have your infrastructure running on it. And before I go any further, does this make sense to everyone? Did I kind of articulate hopefully that encapsulates what we've talked about before? And then, so as Rick said, now what we want to do is, go ahead.
It's not replacing that middle layer. It's just commoditizing that middle layer, or
It's what it's doing is it's giving you a really simple experience, so you don't always have to go into a bunch of different tools, right? So for example, if you look at what HC380 does, you still have vCenter. You can do things in vCenter, but if you need to go and quickly create VMs, you don't have to go to vCenter to do that. You essentially have a couple of buttons that you just push, and that they.
From which tool? From OneView?
It's from the hyper. So in the sense of the HC380, did Saeed run you guys through the demo of it?
No.
No. Okay. I probably can't right now. So it's actual usability experience you have. So you'd log into your HC380, and essentially what it would give you is a set of buttons, right? Small VM, medium VM, large, extra large. And you click on that button, and boom, you get that VM.
Okay, so it's a HP web interface, or it's a HP interface.
It's a HPE management interface, user experience that will allow you to.
I have a demo that I did, so I'll point you to it. I mean,
No, it's just to understand.
really
It's just
Yeah.
to understand, because you have all those components in the middle layer. Are you going to develop plugins in all those components to continue using the tools that you use today, or you're going to take it up a level and work out of the user interface?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
So you can always go into Docker through plugins. You can go into VMware through plugins. You can go into System Center through plugins. But what you'll see us start to do is take what we did for hyperconverged, which is assimilating some of that experience into a very simple interface,
Okay.
and start to run that really simple interface up and down the stack.
Across the
right?
stack. Okay.
So the simplicity that we've developed here, you'll start to see expand across these layers. So that's why the HC380, we talk about it a lot, but view that as being a first step in many steps of creating a nice, simple experience across the data center, across the infrastructure, right here. Any other questions? Does that make sense so far? Yep, everyone say yes already. Okay, and then so what we want to do is, in the past, and this is what we're talking about, traditional CSA00, great tools for your traditional environment, great tools for complex, very complex environments because it has that complexity built in. But maybe not the best tool for your cloud native environment where there's much simpler tools. So instead of being stuck to a specific force stack, instead of doing a monolithic stack, we want to be able to incorporate other partnerships, right? So let's say Kubernetes has momentum in the container world. Well, we don't want to force someone to take Haas and Staccato outside of Kubernetes when they really want Kubernetes. So what Rick was talking about in terms of choice is, how do we go and start to provide PaaS environments, IaaS environments, and other software that should be in there that starts to give people choice across these, so that you're not necessarily forced into one set of tool chains and technology, but rather you can start to pick best of breed, right? And so that's really how we're starting to look at the future. How do we go and make sure we become a, glue and integration and solutions, as Rick would say? How do we become solutions instead of a single monolithic end-to-end stack that we have to go and try to develop and maintain the technology on each layer, which is getting increasingly harder based on the rate that especially this world's moving at.
So how do we do that?
So part of that's coming later. So I think what you'll start to hear as we roll out, especially next Discover, you're going to start to see more and more of the pieces that we are putting together in terms of this stack. So Tim, that's what I know you were asking. Hey, you guys got rid of all this stuff. What does that mean for you? Well, again, that's our opportunity to now go and figure out what are the key pieces we really want. Some of it will be HPE, some of it won't be HPE, and how do we become the glue and have it all make sense and be an integrated piece. And again, I think you'll start to see more of that as we go forward. Not all of that has been publicly talked about yet, but that's essentially how we're looking at it. How do we take these layers, bring them together, and start to offer choice and have that integrated experience across it? That's the teaser for next Discover. Okay, any questions? You guys are quiet. I think that was my main pitch, which I sadly enough I did in 10 minutes.
How stack? I'll give you one.
Sure.
So that middle layer that's managing, that knows about infrastructure, and
Yep.
knows about stack.
Mhm.
How stack aware and how app aware does that layer have to be to do what it needs to do? In other words, how much does it care that there's Kubernetes running there, or is it some sort of a Kubernetes host?
Yeah.
Or VMware, Photon
Yeah.
platform versus CoreOS versus Helium's.
So what it has to be able to do is help execute that environment, right? So, hey, I want my Kubernetes environment, essentially want to press a button and be able to go and, assuming Kubernetes is running with Docker or whatever, go and get that Docker environment down here, get those containers down onto the
The
infrastructure.
generative part, setting it up.
Well, so you can imagine this being a bunch of different things. Again, looking at the HC380, what it does is it'll go and create VMs for you. So yes, part of it is going to be, how do I go and make the infrastructure assume what it needs to assume for the application or for whatever policy is driving that application down.
But then after the configuration happens on day 2, the management
Yes.
operations stuff?
Great question. So yes, it absolutely has to be part of this, right? So it can't just be a day 1 provisioning tool. You have to have this two-way communication, And in fact, really that communication has to go through all layers, right? So,
That's my question.
and if we do it right, again, talking about visions, what we really want is logs to always be passed up and down. So, this layer isn't completely disconnected from this layer, you really want to go to one place and get all your information. And ideally that one place would be a really nice experience.
So there's the machine learning aspect that we talked about, where it hasn't been publicized, but it's baked into this.
You can imagine that. You can imagine that would fit nicely. Again, I can't get into too many exact specifics, but that's how we're seeing it, and that's really where we're marching to. That's a key part. This is one of the key initiatives Rick's talking about, that heal loan.
This is the tricky part of the communication of this, right? Because if you're a developer, and I'm used to developing on a stack right now, and maybe I'm DevOps, right? I got my ops guy with me. I'm just in that, and I'm cloud native because that's the argument. I'm right there, and that's the only box I live in.
Yep.
And for the last 2 or 3 years, that's all I've been told that's sufficient. And to be able to, now big bad IT is going to tell me and take, I don't want, IT is going to come and take away my toys, and HPE, I got to use all this HPE stuff. So that's the challenge of the communication of saying, you need the rest of this management stack to be sufficient in production quality, and yet it has to be lovely enough that I don't hate you for imposing it on.
And the way we see it here is really developers, we understand that you're not going to take the tool chains away from the developers that they're using. They're going to have choice. So this is going to have to be able to accommodate different choices for developers up here. Now, I think the question that we're going to have to wrestle with is whether there's all these different tool chains, right? How much gets into here, or where do we start to do the cut line? Because obviously we can't have a million different options all at once. We're going to have to start very specific and concrete and expand from there. But yes, freedom of tool chains is a underlying philosophy we have. Freedom of developer tool chains.
Is there a separation of roles as in ops in that
so you guys can tell me what you're seeing. I am seeing really leading edge people saying I'm telling my developers they need to learn to do ops. I'm telling my ops people they need to learn to do development, and there's only going to be one role. That's a very small group of people. I run across them, but infrequently. Most people are saying I want to have 2 different roles, my ops person and my developer person. And as we've talked about before, a lot of times now the developer person is starting to be empowered to make decisions. So as we've thought through this, we've broken it out into 2 roles because that's the most common thing we've seen right now. But again, I wouldn't be surprised as the 2 roles start to get segregated that at some point in time they converge into one. And people can tell me if they disagree, but since I'm hearing enough leading edge customers talk about it, it seems to me there's something there.
Well, at the end of the day, you're monitoring so that you can solve problems, right? So if you have 2 separate kinds of problems, then 2 separate dashboards are great. But if I have to drill down in 2 places for one problem, that's bad.
Yes, exactly.
But new age developers or developers that are coming out of school, they don't even understand that bottom stack, right? So separating the roles in 2 really doesn't make sense for them because they click a button today and it gets done, right? So I think my point of view is that it's going to be one role, which is going to be the developer that leads the demand or the supply or the provisioning of the virtual machine and the app all at once.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I would say the only thing, in order for them to provision that virtual machine, there has to be some type of policy around it. And I think, at least for a while, there's going to be someone who's an expert in infrastructure who's going to give them the policy, and then they'll take that policy and run with it. But I agree with you. I think long term, it becomes one. And the trick is, how do you make sure that developer doesn't care about that bottom part? It's so easy.
You have to make it cool.
Yeah, I know. Okay, any other questions, thoughts? Normally, this is what I normally do, but it takes about half an hour, so you guys are
Well, the abbreviations kind of help you.
Yeah.
Save you a bit of time.
Okay, any other questions then? Any other thoughts? Anyone wanted to ask?
How far down can the models get? In other words, what size shop does the whole staff become too much?
That's a good question. I think that's where you can view this as having two different personalities. There'd probably be a hyperconverged personality for those smaller shops. So this in a hyperconverged form factor, and then there'd be more of the high scalable, larger one. So I can kind of see there being the two form factors.
Yeah, because that's one reason they're moving. Those boxes are moving, right? There's fewer knobs, there's fewer
Exactly.
buttons.
They want it as simple as possible, and they don't. Frankly, they're not going to need a whole lot of the scalability stuff that'll be built in. So just simplify it for them and let them go from there. Okay. That was easy. All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
That's it then. Thanks,
you.
guys. Appreciate it.
Definitely. Back at you say,